Hi, welcome to the Art for All podcast. This is the Curious Sketchbook. I'm Danny Gregory. I'm an artist and author and the founder of Sketchbook Skool. I'm joined by my friend, John Muir Laws. Hi, John.
Hey there, I'm John Muir Laws. I am a biologist, artist, teacher, and I've kept sketchbooks of my own for years and years, and they're sort of an adjunct to my brain. And happy to be here discussing all sorts of ideas and concepts and related thoughts with you today, Danny.
Great. Well, today we're going to talk about self-education, what it means to teach yourself a subject, or what it means to teach yourself to make art, which is our focus here. And we're also going to talk about what is the best approach to do and our own personal experiences. We're going to talk about growth mindset. We're going to talk about good and bad teachers, and we're going to talk about just really how to make the best of the resources you have, how to use community, how to find a coach, a mentor, and a teacher, and that may be you, but how to do it the best possible way. And we'll talk about what we've learned and how we teach people to help you to teach yourself. So let's get into it.
This will be fun.
All right, we are just plunging in. We were just briefly discussing, Jack, your transcontinental adventure. You tell us what you
The,
were up to.
well, our Nana, my wife's mother, is our last grandparent who is still with us. So the family went from California over to Maryland to spend some time with her. And when we got over there, it was just this eruption of the Omicron variant of the COVID virus.
Yeah.
And so we just sort of huddled together and hoped for the best, kept our masks on and avoided crowds, did the same on the flight back. And we fortunately nobody's caught the virus. So we're just doing everything we can for our own, there's so much that you can do by being intentional about your distancing, your mask wearing, washing your hands. Those are the things that we can control, and we controlled those variables really well. And we got through without getting sick. So I'm happy to be here and healthy. How are you
Excellent.
doing, Danny?
I'm glad you are too. Yeah, and vaccinations, of course. Those help.
Absolutely. So my wife and I have had all 3 shots, so 2 Pfizers and a booster, and our 2 daughters have had their 2 shots under their skin and now have just become eligible for their booster. So they will be doing that soon. Having something on board to help support our immune system like that, give us an edge should the virus show up in our body, just makes a huge difference to people experience if they get it, and recovery, not having the long COVID, and just keeping our bodies clean and not have that virus run rampant in us. I'm so grateful to science. Thank you, science. Vaccines work.
Absolutely. Yes. I think when we first got our first vaccine, we kind of felt like, it's over. We're done. We're free.
Yes.
We're safe, right? We actually volunteered to work here at the stadium in Phoenix, and we stayed up overnight helping people get their vaccines. And so as compensation, we got our own slightly ahead of the line. And we were like, this is it. We're free. We can do whatever we want. And increasingly, we've all been humbled and realized that, the good news is we're less likely to die, but we're certainly not immune. So
That's right. I think that's a big misunderstanding, that people will think that if this vaccination is supposed to prevent me from getting COVID. Well, that's not the way that our immune systems work. If COVID comes into my body already has, if my body is completely naive to an invading virus, then the virus can just have a party while my immune system slowly goes like, wait, what's this? Wait, is this thing? Oh, wait a minute. We'd better kind of marshal our forces against it. But because I've got that vaccine in my body, all the markers of oh, look, there's this virus in you, are there ready to be detected. So my body is already primed to get on top of the case should any little virus particle make its way in, and then my immune system can marshal. So that we avoid that big lag period where your body's going like, oh wait, what's this thing?
Right.
So it doesn't help me not get it, but should I get it, there are two things going to happen. One is my symptoms are not going to be as severe, and number two, I'm not going to have as heavy a viral load. So I'm much less likely to spread it around to all my friends, family, and anybody at the grocery store.
You speak as if you were married to an epidemiologist.
I am. The amazing Sibel Renault. I'm proud of her. She's brave. She's been on the front lines of dealing with this horrible virus. And in just a few minutes, she's going to be heading out the door to head over to the hospital to do patient care again today.
That must be really tough on you and on your whole family to know that she's on the front lines. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that she is, but not for your sake. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's great.
I'm proud of her.
I can understand that absolutely. So, all right. Well, by the way, I just want to mention one thing quickly, just while we're on this subject, which is not our normal subject for the Curious Sketchbook, but I don't know. This is another thing that we can be curious about, I guess. I'm reading this book called Earth Abides. Have you ever heard of a book like this? It is a book that was written in the early 50s. It's a science fiction novel. And I don't usually read a lot of science fiction novels, but I heard about this book and it sounded sort of interesting. And what it is it's the first or one of the first books that's about basically an apocalyptic virus. And it's about a guy who is just sort of a curious guy. Like I can imagine you being this character in this book. He is very interested in nature and he does a lot of camping. And at the very
Sounds
beginning
familiar.
of the book, at the very beginning of the book, he gets bitten by a rattlesnake. And just then there is an epidemic that suddenly happens really quickly. And basically within 2 or 3 days, it wipes out the 99.9% of humanity. Everybody dies really, really quickly from this vaccine. And a lot of what the book is talking about
from a vaccine or the virus.
I'm sorry, from the virus. Yes, there is no vaccine. And everybody dies very quickly. And so he is bitten by this rattlesnake and he doesn't know about what's happened. And he is in a tent, recovering, or cabin, I think, recovering from this rattlesnake bite. And he has a fever and he has various other symptoms. And then when he recovers, he learns the news about what's happened. And it seems that getting bitten by the rattlesnake somehow supercharged his immune system right at the right moment, kind of like a Spider-Man sort of situation. And so therefore he managed to develop an immunity. And it's really about what happens to the earth when all people are gone. And I've read another book about this idea, which is called The World Without Us.
Yes.
You've heard about that book? Yeah, there was a National Geographic special about it too. And this book, again, this is from the early 50s, and it's really fascinating about what happens to animals, and how domestic animals, react to suddenly there not being any humans around. What happens to wild animals and how they sort of change their behavior and start to come into the places where people were and change their behavior as well. It's also about what happens to cities, what happens to electricity, what happens to water, all these different systems. And it's also about build a society from the ground up. We see a lot of these post-apocalyptic things and they're about zombies or this constant threat. And this book isn't about that threat at all. It's like this has happened and he slowly manages. He's a person who doesn't particularly interact with other people very much. He's kind of a loner, but he slowly starts to realize like he needs other people. And he starts to form a little tribe. And then the book kind of goes over the next 20 years as they start to develop a little community and they start to have children. And then they start to realize like, okay, we're we're basically living off canned goods and living off whatever's left over from
Hmm.
human civilization. And then they start to realize, like, okay, we've got to start preparing for whatever's going to happen next. But it's also about the human impulse to not prepare. And if you're fine now, then just keep doing what you're doing. But also, how much should you prepare for the eventualities? I don't know. It's just a fascinating book, and I just stumbled across it, and I just spent the weekend like completely immersed in it, and it's been really cool. So,
Well, I think those are, you know, those are really interesting themes to explore in our own thinking. Everybody thinks of me as somebody who, must be spending his time reading Thoreau, but I also am somebody who loves actually a good zombie movie. It's an interesting theme in some of the best of them are this idea that there's something going on that's this problem, an external problem. And the people think about that, okay, so that the zombies are your problem, but inevitably in these movies it's human interactions, how we treat each other, and our own greed or selfishness that is the downfall of whatever little community is trying to get going. So ultimately in these movies there's kind of an interesting moral about, it's not the enemy without, it's the enemy within. It's ourselves that we have to confront. And the problems, whatever we're encountering, the problems are going to be the problems that we have. And we don't have any real control over that. There's a virus that's rampaging across the globe, and it's going to be evolving and doing its things on its own terms. But what we do have control is how we respond and the decisions that we make. How do we treat each other? Is our first impulse to get out there and hoard as much toilet paper as we can as we barricade our bunker? Are we helping other people get along? This morning I was in line. Hey, Lovey. Have a really good day at work.
Thank you so much.
Proud of you.
Love you.
That's about.
we just saw her. Zombies, yes.
Yeah. But what we do have control over the decisions that we make and the degree to which we take care of each other. This morning, my daughters and I got up at 6 to go get in line to get tested before they get back to school. They're going to get tested to see if they have an active case of COVID. And the lines were long. And there was a woman who was in her car. Everybody's in cars, sort of in line to get their tests. There's a woman who had car trouble. And this collection of people got out of their vehicles and helped her manage and deal with her situation instead of leaving her alone. She wasn't just somebody who was alone in their car while everybody else was buckled up in their cars. People got out and took care of her. And that is what we need. That's part of the package that we need. We need, of course, science, the vaccinations, and our sort of the best current information on how to respond to something like the virus, or of course the zombies. We also need to keep taking care of each other and draw that boundary of care, not just around ourselves or our immediate family, but how can we still function as a community?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it during 9/11 living in New York. People was behaving that way. I saw it when Hurricane Sandy kind of devastated a lot of the area that I lived in. People joined together. This hasn't brought out necessarily the best in people. It did at the beginning, but there seems to have been a certain amount of everybody for themselves that's gone on. But anyway, we're not going to editorialize or politicize this discussion. That's not in our purview. But I think we can all agree that when possible, let's help each other. So
Let's help each other.
yeah.
And also just want to send a shout out to the person at the testing center. She told me that, she said, "I'm so sorry you've had to wait so long. We're short staffed because many of us have been getting sick." So deep respect to those people who are out managing the testing stations and putting themselves at risk so that our larger community can be safe. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so today's topic is not COVID, despite what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. Our topic is going to be self-education. And I think in a lot of ways we're both self-educated when it comes to certain parts of what we do. I mean, I went to good high school, I went to a good college, but ultimately the thing that I'm passionate about is something that I'm self-educated in. Or the two things, really. I mean, writing is something that I certainly studied in high school a bit. And when I went to college, ironically, when I went to college, there was a creative writing program that you had to apply to. So every other class you wanted to take in college, you just signed up for, and if there was room, you got into. But creative writing, and my creative writing class was taught by an author named Joyce Carol Oates. And, she's a famous author, but she rejected me. I didn't get in. So I never got to take creative writing in college. And I've never read a Joyce Carol Oates book since, just my petty revenge. That showed her, right?
Yeah,
All of
that
you,
take
all of
that.
you who are listening to this, please never read a Joyce Carol Oates book to support me. But
Aw.
ultimately, when it came to writing, I learned by doing. And then when I was in my 40s or late 30s, when I started to draw, similarly, it was, I didn't go to art school. I didn't really take many art classes, maybe a couple in high school. But ultimately, I taught myself how to draw and how to paint. And that's basically what I've done ever since. And what is your story as far as that goes? And not just in terms of art, but also in terms of other things that you are now, focused on.
Um, I Most of my early life, I've been a kid with a pencil in my hand. In 2001, I left the job that I was doing, and I decided I wanted to create this field guide about the Sierra Nevada mountains. And in order to do that, I thought I needed to kind of up my game. There was a scientific illustration program at UC Santa Cruz, and I applied for that, and I was accepted to it, and spent 9 months there studying scientific illustration. Before that, I had, in high school there had been art classes. I took some art classes in college, but at the time that I was doing that, sort of the state of the art of teaching people art was this idea that everybody has an inner artist in them, and you just don't want to get in the way of that, and so put materials in their hands and just kind of let them go. So essentially, there was no technique taught, but there were opportunities to draw and to paint. So you take a figure drawing class, and a person would walk into the middle of the room and take their clothes off, and you'd be there with your charcoal and go. And every once in a while, the teacher would kind of make a rounds and say, make your lines more expressive, and you kind of go, I really don't know what you're talking about. But there's a real minimum of instruction. I always kind of wanted, like, how do I do this? And but this class in Santa Cruz, it was a different story. It was very focused. It's like, all right, we're going to be drawing insects today, and we're going to be doing that in black and white, and we're going to be using stipple, and we're going to be trying to render sort of textured surfaces with little lines and grooves and dots in the back. And here's how you use the microscope, and no, don't look through it that way, look through it this way, because then the light is going to be at a better angle, and you'll see. So it was very, very, very specific.
And is that because it was scientific illustration? It wasn't self-expression. It was design.
Right.
You were
It was
being taught how.
designed.
Yeah, you're being
You were
taught how to
saying
be an objective.
we want you to be able to render this beetle in a way that people looking at it will recognize the texture on the surface of its carapace, right? And it was intense. So every day, you wake up early and you draw. There would be these critiques that would be the most detailed, specific, like this part of this beetle's tarsus, it doesn't really have a sense of volume to it. It just feels flat to me. You're like, yeah, that section of that tarsus. Oh, I see what, but it was because it was so specific, everybody in that cohort, we got so much more sort of technically precise in what we were doing. And because we were drawing so much, we all got a lot better. And it ended up being an incredibly supportive environment that encouraged us just to kind of work together and do more. And so it it was a really positive experience for me in taking art lessons. Before that, I'd been kind of like meh on these art lessons and had done everything kind of on my own and looking at a few books. Since then, I have continued to draw and draw and draw, and also have devoured books by other people. And I think I'm now kind of better able to kind of sort through them and kind of like, this is an idea that I need. This is an idea that I need. I've got kind of a bigger pictures of kind of this drawing process. So when I'm looking through one of these kind of, art self-help books, I can spot parts in it that like, oh, this is going to help my game a little bit more easily. So I'm a combination. It started off self-taught. Then I took this really intensive, very specific course and loved it. And since then, I've continued to do my self-education.
So that is interesting. That's very different from my experience. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about it, I was thinking, I seem to remember that when I was younger, going back to when I was a kid, that I bristled when people would tell me specifically how to do stuff that was creative. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
true of writing as well. I mean, writing, I remember, in high school, my teacher would critique what I'd written and, red pencil stuff and,
Yes.
all that kind of thing. I was just like, oh, I really, really resented it and hated it. And I would come up with all kinds of theories about like why this stuff couldn't be taught. And, whenever I would take a class that had anything to do with art history, and they would like break down paintings and they would say like, there's a triangular shape that connects, the drapery here with the saint's head over there, all that kind of stuff. And I hated it. And I would say to myself, I just don't believe that that's really the way artists work. And I don't think that they have all this kind of subtext in there. And in English class, in high school, when they would take apart, a novel and they would talk about the themes and the symbolism. And I would always think again, like, is any of that really real? Is that really the way artists work? Is that just like nonsense that English teachers have come up with? I was just always rebelling in my mind, at least. I mean, I occasionally would say it out loud, but I think, and when it came to art making, I just think I would not have been. I mean, you were, older, obviously,
Yeah.
and you were very
And I was
focused
going there specifically to get that.
to learn that
Right.
particular thing, right? So because
Yeah.
like when
Yeah.
my son went to art school, he went to Rhode Island School of Design. It's a really good school, and I think a lot. I mean, the first year they did do drawing, and they did, and he was kind of amazed at how many kids who were students there had had never drawn, had never learned to draw, didn't
Yeah.
draw, and I thought like, really, like you're going to art school and you never really you knew how to draw. I mean, Jack knew how to draw. That's my son, Jack. He knew how to draw because, we always would draw together. But, it just felt like similar to what you're saying, that learning that art was, and I think this is something that kind of developed, 50 years ago. Art education is supposed to be conceptual, teaching people how to think like artists, particularly since most art, the focus on representational art, it's diminished so much over the last century. So I think that people didn't think that you go to art school to learn how to draw and paint technically. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that is what an artist should focus on to some extent. That, you need to focus on how to see and think like an artist, not just how to render and how to use certain materials. But that is something you want to learn too. So it is a bit of a
Right.
conflict,
Right.
right? So like, why are you going to school exactly? And I think I've certainly bought thousands of art instruction books over the years. And you buy it, you go to the bookstore and you see like, oh, a book on watercolors, and you buy it and you looking at the pictures, and you kind of ignore most of the text because a lot of times they're not really that well written, or they're using the kind of language you described before, where you sort of say, I don't really understand really what they're talking about, draw expressively, this, or they're talking very technically about the materials. So I just found, like, I would look at the pictures for inspiration, but I think I bought a lot of books that I never really used to learn from. Like, I didn't, to some extent, when you have this desire to learn to draw, it's mitigated a little bit by buying a book on how to draw. So you go, I really want to learn how to draw. Go and buy a book on how to draw. And then, like, that itch is scratched. And,
Right. Because that's on my shelf, it's now kind of done.
Kind of know it now, right? And it's kind of like,
Yes.
and it's the same as like buying art supplies. I feel like
Yeah.
making art. Let me go and buy some art supplies. Okay, now I don't need to make art anymore. I spent.
That's right. I can put them in that box that's on the shelf in the closet.
Exactly, with all the
And
other.
I got that much closer to doing art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost. And one day I'll use them. Yeah. So, but I think when it comes to art instruction books, and I've written, as of you, we've both written books on how to teach people to draw. And it's, in some extent, it's difficult to write a book on how to teach people to draw. It's difficult to say, okay, here, it's like writing a book on how to drive. I always bring up driving as an analogy, but it's like, you got to do it. You got to do it. So how can I write a book that actually, rather than instructs you, kind of more inspires you, so that you'll actually do it? Because again, buying books on art instruction and buying art supplies is only useful if you actually get them out and start working with them.
Well, I think that what you're talking about there with the driving school, that learning how to drive is a great analogy, because you can see the movies, you can study the manual, but you also have to get behind the wheel.
Right.
But if you get behind the wheel without any of that, of seeing the movies or getting some of the theory, you're going to be a real hazard to yourself and others.
You might die before you learn to drive.
Yeah, and you can, and if you survive that first month or two, right, then you'll probably emerge a good driver. But there's some stuff that we've figured out about operating a motor vehicle that works really, really well. And not just sort of rules, but the idea, you come up to the street you're going to cross, and you turn your head to the left, and then to the right, and then to the left. So you go left, right, left. And that wouldn't have occurred to me, but somebody taught me left, right, left. And so what I'm doing is I'm first looking where the place where the first car that I'm going to be getting hit by will be. And then I look back and when it's clear there, I look back the other direction to see if the far lane is clear. But before I pull out into traffic, I'm going to look back to where the car is going to be coming again. So back to the left. And that little left, right, left habit, it works really well. I might not have come up with, hey, let's look at negative shapes. But looking at the negative shapes, somebody points this out to me, like, oh, yes, that works really well. That's a left, right, left. It's this sort of weird little thing we can do. And it makes the mechanics of this work so much better. I don't know if I would have come up with left, right, left, or if I would have come up with looking at negative shapes if I just got behind a wheel.
That's why I think one of the best art instruction books is Betty Edwards' Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, because it teaches you.
Mad props to Betty Edwards.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 things that you learn from that book that are the things that you need to know. And drawing negative shapes is one of them. Her exercise where you draw upside down is so transformative. I mean, I've done that exercise with so many people, and they cannot believe that they were able to draw this thing, that they were able to copy a drawing by, I forget who it's by, Picasso or something. And then you turn it around, and it's like a magic trick that you did to yourself. And understanding the whole, the theory behind this sort of split brain notion that you have to not think symbolically, it's totally one of those like light bulb moments. And so, yes, there are things that, again, nobody really in the history of art instruction ever kind of knew that stuff. Like they probably knew it, but she articulates it in such a great way by tying it to brain science and to developments in how the brain functions that just resonates so much with, particularly with people who are new to drawing, because it sort of says to you, yeah, there are actual sort of objective aspects to this process that you can learn and understand. And if you do, you'll make qualitative leaps immediately. And you do.
Yeah,
You do.
you do. You do.
And I think another thing that's cool about that book is she has these kind of before and after examples of
Aren't
people.
those fun? Aren't
Yeah.
those fun?
And in a lot of ways, you could say, well, any art instruction book could probably have those, but most don't. And in some ways, they're like testimonials, like this really works. Look, it really worked with me. But on another level, it also makes it accessible. And you say, oh, my drawings are lousy like that first drawing is. Could I really get to this other place? And there's sort of a guarantee that like you will get there. And that gives you confidence. And so confidence is another one of those sort of primal learning experiences you have to have when it comes to drawing that says, you know what? It's not really about talent. It's not really even about any kind of tricks or technical things. It's just believing that you can do it that will make a huge, huge difference in what you're doing. So again, those are things you might figure out by yourself, but a great instruction book can help you to kind of catapult forward in a way that's really great.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found myself talking a lot about in my workshops is this idea of the growth mindset.
Yeah,
and this
because
is
that's a fascinating
so
concept.
growth. The idea behind growth mindset, it comes from our our sort of better understanding through neuroscience of the way that we learn. And we used to believe that people's brains developed um, throughout their adolescence, and then somewhere in there they stopped growing, and then that was the brain you had and the brain cells that you have to play with. And after that was just kind of a slow decline, sort of depending on how much partying you were doing. But you're basically, here's the brain you get, and that's the brain you have. And so in that context, it sort of would make sense for people that like, well, I'm going to let's find out if I have a good brain or a bad brain. So I'm going to take an IQ test. But what we found as people have gone in and continued to study brains is that idea was an interesting hypothesis, but it's totally wrong. And human brains develop throughout our entire life. And the signal that we need to kind of get your brain to grow is repetition with effort. And by kind of showing up again and again and again, you are making your brain physically change its shape and structure. So all learning is actually physically rewiring neurons in your brain and building new neural connections. So you are actually changing the structure of your brain. And you do that at all ages. And if you stop doing that, stop challenging your brain, and your brain doesn't have to work, your brain will also start to prune away branches that it doesn't need anymore. But the minute you start pushing yourself again and kind of challenging your brain, then it starts rewiring and building new structures in your brain. So it's not the brain that you're born with, it's the brain that you make through the work and the decisions throughout your entire life. And what they found is that if you teach this fundamental idea to people, it changes the way that they face challenges and practice. Because if you believe that the brain that you've got is the brain that you've got, and something is hard, well, then obviously this is just beyond your pay grade. And so you'd better do something else. But if something is hard and you've got, instead of that fixed mindset, a growth mindset, you're like, oh, this is challenging. Huh, that's interesting. And then what you do is you reframe that feeling of, oh, this is hard, to, and when you are experiencing that, you're saying to yourself like, oh, cool, this is the feeling of my brain growing. And so criticism instead of something that brings you down. If you've got a fixed mindset and somebody says you didn't do that well, you missed this and this and this, you feel really bad and you don't like them. But if you've got a growth mindset and somebody says, this part didn't work and this part or this part and this part, and you look at that and you go like, oh, that's right. I'm going to try to do that differently this time. How could I do that differently?
Thank you,
What
sir.
was
May I
going
have
on?
another? Right.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, but you really mean it. You're
Right.
not just your brain is going, okay, good. So coaching helps instead of coaching. You feel irritated at the coach if you've got a fixed mindset and somebody's saying like, oh, do this differently. You're like, no, the brain I've got is the brain I've got, pal. Why are you getting on my case? Instead of, oh, this is great. Yes, okay. Now what else am I going to do? So it totally changes the way that you face a mistake. So if you make a mistake and you've got a fixed mindset, oh, you did something bad. If you make a mistake and you've got a growth mindset, you're like, oh, in each of those mistakes is your opportunity to learn to do something differently. So there's a wonderful, there's a quote from one of my favorite growth mindset researchers is that, well, not just this idea that challenge is the feeling of your brain growing, but I've completely lost my train of thought. There was another idea in there. And what is it? What is it? What is it? It'll come to me in a moment.
So let me take
But
over for a second to say, like,
yes,
I think obviously it's empowering. If you grow up if you feel like you've grown up, for instance, in a society where you are in a caste, or you are, you're going to be a serf because your father was a serf, it takes away your impulse to try.
that's
You're
right.
locked into this particular situation.
And the caste system can also be built around the myth of talent.
Exactly. So I was born incapable of drawing. I'm not an artist. I this and that. And I think it's also interesting. This, Malcolm Gladwell wrote that whole thing about the notion of the 10,000 hours to master a given skill. He talked about that's what it takes, but and that's actually inaccurate, because it's not just showing up. It's not showing up. It is challenging yourself. It is forcing yourself to try to be active and to always be pushing yourself into discomfort. Discomfort is a really important aspect of the growth mindset, right? Because you don't want to just say, well, I play the scales and the piano every day for 10,000 hours. I should be able to,
Now
be
bring on the Rachmaninoff. Why is it not
exactly.
working? I'm just really good at scales now.
Right. And I think
Uh,
similarly, when I talk to people who say, I just can't draw noses, I just can't draw horses, I just can't draw buildings, I just can't do this. And so then you don't, and then you never will be able
right.
to. But if you say to
That's right.
yourself, you know what, I can't draw this, but let me try it. Or, oh,
Yeah.
that was really terrible. It
Or
was
just
trouble.
insert yet after that. I
Yeah,
can't draw it yet.
exactly.
Right.
And
That yet mindset is really, really powerful. And so just to
did you pick up your thought again?
know that there were two other thoughts that
Okay.
riffed off what you were just saying a moment ago, and now they're gone. But you keep going, and if those, I'm going to make a little kind of some doodles as these ideas come to me, so that the next idea actually going to I'm going to have. Oh yeah, I remember sort of one of these thoughts. So if you just are, you're talking about discomfort. And they've actually looked into this and sort of what is the optimal place in terms of your discomfort in any challenge. And what it is you want to get yourself, your brain, to enjoy being just outside of your comfort zone. So the sweet spot for neural development is not when you're totally overwhelmed, because then you're going to get panicked. You're like, I can't do this, right? It's not where you're comfy, because now then you're not having to learn anything new. But if you just kind of get used to the idea of, I'm going to push myself just a little bit outside of my comfort zone, that is the place where you can surf. You want to surf the wave that is just slightly larger than the one that you know you can do.
Yeah. I mean, my yoga instructor always says you should feel uncomfortable, but not in pain. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're in a place of discomfort, then that's where growth feels.
Yes.
But
Yes.
pain means it's an alarm, you're doing something wrong. So I think a lot of times we're afraid to take risks because we're afraid of calamity. We're afraid of
Hmm.
trying to go into somewhere new. I mean, I've talked before about when I went to clown school. Speaking of self-education, I went to
Oh,
yeah, I went to clown school, which was I mean, the most extreme discomfort. How can you do things that are based in, public humiliation and because clowns ultimately we enjoy clowns because we sort of see ourselves in them, right? You look at Charlie Chaplin and you think, yeah, I like it's externalizing this thing that we're always afraid of doing. And here's a person who does it and survives, pratfalls and all kinds of disastrous things. And that's the role that clowns have in our society and in our own psychology is just we can go vicariously with them to a place that we would ourselves be embarrassed or ashamed to go there. But taking that on and saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to try and experience this in order to feel okay with a bad thing happening to me. Like, if I'm always terrified that something disastrous will happen, if I'm afraid of doing a bad drawing, and then I force myself, to do a bad drawing. I've done this exercise with people where I've said, let's try and do a bad drawing. You will fail if you do a good one. So let's try, like, what would it mean to do a bad drawing? What does that actually mean? Can you force yourself to do it? And unfortunately, most people come back and they say, you know what? I ended up really loving the drawing that I did. And I say, well, you failed.
you
That's
failed.
terrible. You failed. That's a
It's
terrible
a
good drawing.
D minus. Let me get out my
Exactly.
red pen.
Exactly. So I think, finding situations for ourselves where we say, how can I be okay with falling on my face? And, by doing that, I know, again, it's like lifting weights at the gym. You want to get to the point of failure, right? If you lift
Hmm.
weights and you can do the whole set, then there's no point in doing it. It's
Yeah.
only it's only when you get to the point where you cannot do one more that you know that you had a good workout. And so similarly with drawing, it's like we too often think that we have not grown because we didn't do well. And in fact, that the opposite should be the case. Have you
That's
found
right.
have you found a thread again?
Oh yeah. So, and but I just wanted to reinforce what you're saying about giving yourself permission to take those risks and give yourself permission to make those mistakes. You have to sort of reframe what those mistakes are, because in those, that is where you're learning. Oh, I remember the thing that I was the cool idea about growth mindset, um, and no, it just left. It's strange. My brain is not holding on
Brain
to ideas
doesn't
very
like
long
this
today.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's a good one. When it comes back the third time,
Can't wait.
we'll
Can't
catch it
wait.
then.
Come around.
This is just building up for
Suspense.
that. But sort of another kind of related, kind of interesting idea is kind of when you're talking about, it's not just sort of sitting down at the piano and going dum 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 and doing chopsticks a gazillion times for your 10,000 hours. And also, so first of all, you're right that there's a lot of confusion about that 10,000 hours thing that makes people think that if I want to develop a skill, I need to devote 10,000 hours to it. But that's not what that research is saying. That was to get to be the first violin in the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. What we're talking about here is how much time and effort do you need to put in to the point where you're getting positive reinforcement from what you're doing that gets you to want to do it again and again and again and again, or to the point where you see your skill is developing and growing. And that happens really fast. You're then on the path to getting that 10,000 hours in. So it's not like you wait for 10,000 hours and then you're going to see results. In this, you start doing this, you push your brain outside of that little comfort zone, and you will start to develop these skills. And there's a real pleasure that comes from, you mentioned the before and after drawings. You open up the front of your sketchbook and you're kind of like, this is what I was doing 3 months ago, and this is what I'm doing now. And I can see that it is different. And so you don't need that to put in that 10,000 hours in order to get really significant results. The 10,000 hours thing is about being first violin in the world's most prestigious orchestra.
Right.
Or to being the world's champion chess master,
Right.
right? To be that person, which for me is not my goal.
But
Right?
also putting
I
in
think
10,000 hours might not get you that goal either. So you could put in
Mhm.
10,000 hours and not be the world's chess champion.
That's right.
But if you want to be the world chess champion, you're going to have to put in that time. So
You're going to
yeah,
have
as
to
you
put in
said
that
that,
time. But
right,
you start putting the time in on whatever it is now, and you're going to start to see results from that work that you put in. And it's not, again, just repeating things, but in what they're talking about is the idea of deliberate practice. So not just practice, but deliberate practice. And the thing that makes deliberate practice different than practice is that when people are doing deliberate practice, there is a clear feedback mechanism that you're using. So if you're doing the same thing, let's say I'm going to learn how to play golf, and you get the stick and you kind of whack around. You'd get really good at being a weed whacker, but you wouldn't get good at hitting that ball where you want it to go.
right,
So with feedback, like I did this time, and this happened. So now I'm going to do it differently this time. Oh, that worked. I'm going to do that again. So you're actually looking at what you have done and then looking for how you're going to intentionally change that to the next stage. In doing that, if there is a clear way of getting feedback on your own, you can do that on your own. It also, what people have found is with the process of deliberate practice, having a coach or even a person who you are doing this with, a partner,
mm-hmm,
makes a huge difference. So if you and your best friend are saying, like, we're going to decide, let's take up urban sketching together, right? And then you go out and you do some sketching together. So first of all, you're socially distanced, you're wearing your mask, you're having a great time, and you have snacks together. It's enjoyable. You're going to do it again, and then you do it again. So that's going to let you get better. But if you also then every once in a while, I'll just say, like, let's take a look at the sketches we did last week. We don't have to look at the ones we just did right now because we might have a little bit too much ego wrapped up in those. But let's take a look at the ones from last week, and you help me see what I can change in those to make it better. And I'll look at yours and give you the same kind of feedback. So you're looking at it through a different person's eyes. You can also hold your own artwork up to a mirror, and sometimes that gets you to think about it in a different way.
or
But
upside down like Betty Edwards.
yes, that's right. So those approaches, intentionally looking for, I'm not just going to do the same thing a lot, but I'm going to look for what is working that I want to continue doing. What's not working that I might want to change.
That's not critique. That's not like a crit that people kind of, are terrified of. Like somebody's going to say I'm bad or somebody's going to give me a grade. It's not that. It's, as you said, it's advice. It's, hey, why don't we try
Right.
this?
Yeah.
I
And
think
it
that's
only
important.
works. Yeah. And it only works in the context of having a growth mindset.
Right.
Because if you do that with your friend and your friend has got a fixed mindset, they're not going to want to talk to you anymore.
Right. Yeah, you have to have rules of engagement that kind of determine what it is that you're trying to get out of doing the drawing. If you say, okay, this is what I want to do, can we now analyze this drawing in terms of what my goals are? Not is this any good, but if you say I've been struggling with this kind of drawing, can we look at this drawing and talk about like why that is? So it's focused and it's diagnostic as opposed to some criticism that you could take personally. You want to have some objectivity about it too. Yeah.
Yeah. The danger is if our identity gets wrapped up in that drawing,
Right.
then and somebody criticizes it, they are
Oh, I'm just no
criticizing,
good. I'm just no good.
yeah, then I'm no good. So that's why having some emotional space or distance from that is important. And I am not that drawing. And
Right.
so a critique of that drawing is not a critique of me. And that's one reason why it's good to critique the one you did last week
Because
instead of the one you just finished, because
that's the old
then
you.
the one you're the one you've just finished, like that can be me, but that's the old me over there. We can talk about that. But this, and kind of, it reminds me of the when I was in the scientific illustration program, we did these critiques, and the way that they started is everybody was being just sort of very, very delicate with each other. Nobody wanted to step on anybody's toes. And, we'd put all our drawings up and say, like, so let's get some feedback. And everybody would say, like, oh, that's just so nice. Oh, what about this one? That one's just so nice. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's really pretty. That's so nice. And it was positive reinforcement. And that was nice. And so you got, at the end of it, you'd spend all this time looking at it and people would say, well, that was nice. And so we did this for a few weeks. And then we sat down as a group and we said, like, you know what? Our goal here is to get better. And I forget who it was. It started off with one person. And he said, like, for the last several weeks, you folks have told me that the stuff that I do is nice and it's pretty. Like, what should I do next with it? And the best advice was like, oh, frame it. Right? And the person said, like, I don't want to hear that anymore, because what I really want to do is, this person came at us with this really growth mindset and said, what I really want to do is I want to get better. So if there's some part of it, right, that I can improve, please, I really need you to point that out to me. And then once that person said that, the next person said, like, yeah, me too. Me too, me too. And so as a group, we decided, let's all do this for each other. And we were still respectful to each other. We were still kind to each other. It was a supportive, loving environment in that class. But we could kind of get in there and help each other this is the two ideas that I found were really helpful. One is to find the parts that are the strongest and be able to articulate not just this is nice, but this is nice because this, right? There's a specific thing that I recommend that you do again.
Right.
And this part over here, I'm challenged with this. I'm having trouble with kind of reading this part. This part is sort of fading into this. Like, that contrast is really, here it's strong, it's really working for me. Here it's, where it's not working, but specifically, not just saying, I don't like that, but saying this little aspect of this thing, and again, being specific, then would allow that person to either correct that, or on their next drawing, put that correction into play. And that kind of a discussion, we didn't have the vocabulary of growth mindset at that time, but looking back on it, that's exactly what we were doing. We were reinforcing the things which we wanted to keep. We were identifying the things which we would want to change. And without ego, without a threat, we were moving our ball down the field.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm paying tuition to go to this school. I want to get something out of it. I'm not just here to feel nice.
Right.
Okay? But also, I think you can, as you said, I think you can learn to do that to yourself too. You have to have some distance.
Yes.
And you have to not allow your inner critic to turn this into a complete sort of diatribe or a condemnation of everything you are as a human being, just because you didn't get the I right. But, there's definitely an opportunity for having a system. I think a lot of what we're talking about here is being systematic. I think what happens a lot, and I mean, I think about last week we talked about passion, and the week before we talked about beginning. I feel like this is kind of tying some of these threads together, which is a lot of times when you begin and you are self-taught, you're teaching yourself to do this, you're going to fairly quickly not have good results. You're going to do your first drawings and you're going to say, yup, there you go. I knew it. I suck. I'm no good at this. I'm not going to get anywhere. And of course that isn't true. But if you had somebody else there with you, if you have a teacher who says, you have to do X number of drawings every day in order to get a grade at the end of the semester, that's going to motivate you to keep going and to push through, this nonsense. Or if you have a friend, or if you have just a group of people who you're working, but you're still going to have resistance. You're still going to have a voice inside of you that says, oh, it's embarrassing to show up to that group because everybody else is so good and I'm so terrible, or, oh, I don't want to bother my friend because, they're so much better at it. And I'm just, all those kinds of things are all just stuff, voices you have to suppress because they're going to get in your way. But you're going to have to persevere. And if you're just learning from books or from YouTube videos, there's going to be a lot of reason to give up. And you have to sustain that, and you have to say to yourself, I'm going to have a system where I say, you know what, I'm going to draw steadily for a month. I'm going to find one or two books. I think Betty Edwards is a great book, but if you don't
Yeah,
want to use
love
that
her.
one, you could use my book, How to Draw Without Talent. You can just find a book that you stick to, and you say to yourself, I'm not going to evaluate this for X amount of time. And when that time arrives, I'm going to evaluate myself with this growth mindset. What can I teach myself that will help to advance me? Where are the areas that I need to improve? Nothing has to do with questioning the basic premise of this whole enterprise. I'm not discussing whether or not I should learn to draw. That's not under
Right.
discussion.
Right.
I'm going to discuss how can I get to this goal that I have to feel comfortable doing it, and also recognize that you will never stop learning. I mean, both of us
That's
constantly
right.
are learning. We're still reading art instruction books. We're still practicing. We're still trying to push ourselves into new areas, because that pushing reaps rewards. Trying to do new things, trying to use new media, Jack, you've completely rethought how you draw birds, the kind of a foundational thing for you. And you've come up with a
Yes.
whole, you've basically admitted to yourself, this way that I've been doing it for all this time, I wrote books about it, you said, and now
Yeah.
I've changed
Wrote a book
my
on how to
opinion.
draw birds, and now I think I've got a better system for drawing birds
Yeah,
than is shown in How to Draw Birds.
right. So that
There's
must have
still
been
a lot of stuff in there on details of wings and things, but like the 1, 2, 3 of how you build your basic bird, I would now totally do that in a different way.
right. So that must have been, but that's a risky proposition. You're kind of saying, you know what? Hi, I'm McDonald's. Guess what? We don't make Big Macs that way anymore. It's a challenge,
Yeah.
to go and to say I'm rethinking it. But it's not only is it a sign of integrity, but it keeps it interesting. You want to keep,
Mm.
and I know a lot of professional illustrators who developed a style of drawing, developed a topic of things that they draw, became well known for it, developed a business around it. They were the go to guys if you wanted to have a drawing of, and then became really unhappy because of it. So even though they were getting paid every day to draw, they weren't growing. And drawing had just become this rote thing. So even though they're really good, even though we would all love to be able to draw cars like they do or draw landscapes like they do, they were unhappy because they weren't growing anymore. And a lot of times being an illustrator means you might be giving up your bread and butter by changing your way of doing it. I remember my friend of mine referring to James Taylor and Fire and Ice, and saying, you know what, when you go see James Taylor, he can play his new album for you, but he better play Fire and Ice. He's going to have to get around. He's going to have to play the hit. He's going to have to do that at some point. So sure, yeah, go ahead, but stretch yourself. That's fine. We want to hear your new stuff, but you've got to do the foundational thing, and that's not necessarily a great place to be as a creative person. You want to always be pushing yourself and challenging yourself and growing and developing. That's and failing along the way. That's definitely part of the deal. So
Yeah,
all right.
I like that. And I'm going to bounce into that thought a little bit. You're talking about how you can be your own coach, and yes, but but think about what the characteristics that you want in a coach. If you have a coach with a fixed mindset, that coach is going to be a terrible coach.
That's true.
Right? So what you're looking for specifically in a coach is somebody who has a growth mindset and is going to pay attention to you to help you specifically change and grow. And you can be that for yourself. But if you find you put pen to paper and immediately your inner critic pops up on your shoulder and is just telling you all the reasons why you can't do this, then you've essentially got a coach with a fixed mindset.
That's true.
And so you have to work deliberately to change the way you frame things for yourself. How can you get yourself to look at your own work from a perspective of a fixed mindset? If you can't, you do need a coach, or at least somebody to help you be able to think about what you're doing from the perspective of a growth mindset.
As a process, not as a
As a
goal.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
and exactly. And once you kind of get those routines in, you can take it over yourself. But you think about it, Serena Williams has a coach,
Right.
right? Why does Serena Williams has a coach? She's really good at tennis, but she's got a coach because it's often hard to look at yourself and know your next steps. Tiger Woods has a coach. Why does Tiger Woods have a coach? The same reason. And that, so if you are doing self-coaching, if you find that the voice of your coach is a fixed mindset one, then you got to tap out and go get some support, right? And that can be from, you can create your own peer group of you and your friends. You kind of discuss what you're going to be doing, and then have your friend get in there with you and really point out, like, this part is working, you're doing that more now, look, you weren't doing this before, you're doing this now, you're improving. It really help you see that it's not just ego stroking to look through your journals and see that you're getting better. You're reinforcing the idea in your head that this whole growth mindset thing works.
And yeah, and getting better could also mean that you have taken some detour at some point, where you've gotten really good at something, and then you're willing to do something that will make you suddenly get bad again. You take on a new
Mm-hmm.
medium, you take on a new subject, you take on a new approach, and suddenly you're 10 steps back, but you're on it, but overall you're growing. You're still getting stronger because you're trying a new technique that, the one that you've been doing for so long, you've perfected. So now it's time to push yourself into unfamiliar territory and try something completely new. And that will also give you new insights into the thing that you used to be perfect at as well. I think,
That's so true.
you want to always be changing. You want to always, I mean, not to do a commercial, but I think at Sketchbook Skool, that's really what we have been focusing on, and are finding more and more ways of doing that, of creating peer groups. So you have an instructor, but then you also have groups of people that support each other and push you in different directions. I mean, we have a new program where we're trying to learn about. It's called Show and Talk, where you show something and you get input from it. So you're learning not only how to be brave enough to show something, but
That's great.
also how to teach other people to do it. All right, good. Well, we've crammed another hour with blather, and I think it's always been fun, and I'm glad that we're continuing to do this. So thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed bouncing these ideas around. And for me, it's also useful, just even I've been doing this a lot and teaching some of this stuff, just to reflect again. This helps put these ideas of growth mindset at the front of my brain. And it's something that, it's not like you kind of hear the idea and then, oh, now I'm going to have a growth mindset. Still find, the specter of that fixed mindset will sometimes come and haunt me. And having conversations like this is going to help me the next time that voice pops up, kind of like, oh, I recognize you, right? You're the coach that I don't want, right? You can even name that coach, right? If you had like a horrible PE coach in elementary school, you can name it after your PE coach, and there's Ed Shaffley, right? And yeah.
I know. I remember I had a teacher, fifth grade, sixth grade. He was also the shop teacher, taught like wood shop, metal shop, and then he taught art. So that gives you a bit of an insight into him. And he gave us this assignment: draw birds. And so I was excited by this idea. And I went home and I spent the weekend and got a big piece of paper, and I did a painting actually, of an oasis in the desert. And it had hundreds of different kinds of birds there. And there were palm trees over the oasis, but then there were parrots and there were eagles overhead and there were birds on the ground. There's so many different kinds of birds all gathered around this thing. And then there were mountains in the distance, and there's this whole thing. I brought it in, handed it in, got it back with, I think it was a D minus. The subject was birds, not landscape. I mean, I will never forget that. I mean, I
Yeah,
will not say the
yeah.
teacher's name, he whose name will not be said,
That's
but
right. He should not be named.
I will never forget him. I'll never forget that lesson and what an impact it had on me and my
Yeah,
sense of confidence when I was 11,
yeah, yeah,
and I think now I look back and I think like, what was up with that guy? Like why would you say that to an 11-year-old? It would obviously worked really hard on this thing. Like that's like,
yeah.
what were you
It's
drinking that morning? But yeah, so I think you know, I think we learn a lot from bad teachers. We learn a lot from bad bosses. We learn a lot from bad parents. It's nice to have good ones to learn from too, but bad ones also teach us how not to be, and they kind of
that's right.
give us cues that we can give, as you said, mentoring, coaching ourselves. It is, even if we have another coach, we still need to be good coaches and good friends and helpers to ourselves, which is something that a lot of people I think struggle when it comes to art making.
And we don't want to absorb though that mindset from that bad teacher. We can still learn from that bad teacher about what doesn't work, but if they're role modeling to us a mindset and they've got one that's toxic, and not just toxic, but scientifically inaccurate.
There you go.
The fixed mindset, as a scientist, right, this is one of the hardest criticisms that I can level. The fixed mindset is scientifically inaccurate.
All right, good. Well, yeah.
And just to be clear, we're not endorsing that anybody go out and get bitten by a rattlesnake.
But if you do, but I mean, it couldn't hurt. Well, actually, no, it couldn't. Don't do it. Don't do it. Be safe. Be smart.
Be safe. Be smart. Make art.
There you go. Even
one of the great opportunities that we have is to just give yourself give yourself the time and the opportunity to feed that part of your brain and your heart with creative projects, and water that with the juice of freshly squeezed growth mindset, and you're going to see amazing things happen.
With that, let's go our separate ways. I'm off to drink a couple gallons of creative mindset. What is it? Creative growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Yeah. Mindset. Freshly squeezed growth mindset.
I will go and pluck some. That's great. Thank you.
It's good stuff.
I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. Thanks, Dan.